I just couldn't resist not giving a shir today, simply because it's an amazing episode that takes place in our parsha, which I honestly believe is very important, because I think it's a theme. You know, I've said this many times in this context. There are certain themes that repeat themselves throughout Chumash, and I think this is definitely one of them. And this is a very important one that we're all very familiar with. So let's take a look together. And also, there aren't so many narratives in Sefer Vayikra, so when there is one, it's very glaring. And that really is a day of tremendous tragedy. Let's set it up properly, right? So it's the 8th day, it's Vahi b'yom Shemini. By the way, as an aside, I don't know how ladies, if you're aware of this at all, but this is Shemini of Shemini, meaning we actually lane Shemini 8 times till we get to Shemini, because we've read it on Shabbos afternoon, Monday and Thursday, going back before Pesach, and continuing at least Mincha in the afternoon during Pesach, and this week, because it's before Shemini, so we'll read the first Aliyah of Shemini 8 times, which is Shemini. It's only one that could ever happen at Shemini, so it's pretty neat. It's like a big Gabbai Balkor is all really excited about this time. You know, it's like okay, fine. That was just as an aside. Hopefully, maybe someone else would have showed up during that time, but I guess not. So let's read together. So I want to read over the psukim of what's called the Chet of Nadav and Avihu. I'm going to highlight certain things, and I want you to tell me, what did they do that was so bad? And more importantly, where have you heard of a lot of these ideas in the past in Chumash? Because that ultimately is the question. The first part, maybe you guys have learned before, I come up with a few ideas. I'm not sure if that second part, perhaps, we've studied. So let's take a look. Vayisa ran es yadav ela'am vayivarchem. So it's the 8th day, it's the day of the Miluim. Tremendous fanfare and excitement. Comes along Aaron a Kohen, and he blesses the people. Vayered masos chatas v'alav hashlamim, and he finally descends after offering the various korbanos. Vayavo Moshe v'Aaron elo moed vayetzu v'varchu esham, and so too Moshe and Aaron, right, approach El Moed, and they leave, and they also bless the people. And there the glory of God has returned. Generally speaking, when we talk about Vayar Chavod Hashem, that's usually referring to probably the clouds. Very good. Then what happens? Chavtalin. Vateitze eish milifnei Hashem. Fire again descends from God, which means probably from this kavod, right? From this glory, from the heavens. Vatochal al mizbeach es haolav es hachalavim. And what does the fire do? Vatocha means God doesn't eat. I mean, He does eat, but they're consumed. Good. So the meat is consumed on the altar. Vayar kula'am, and all the people see this. Vayaronu vayplu al panehem, and there's a sense of joy. There's a sense of arena, right? And there's a sense of trepidation at the same time, and therefore they fall on their faces. Now, it's a new chapter. Now, here is something which so remember that the prakim in Chumash were not done by Jews. They were done by Priest Langston in the Middle Ages when he wanted to, shall we say, kind of organize the Bible. So, this is not necessarily a Jewish break, but rather it's the Christian distinction of prakim. So, you'll see, I think, why that's important. Let's continue. Vayikra b'nei Aaron Nadav Avihu Ishmachtaso. What's wrong?
It's fine. It's just the nuts that she offered me. The multi-suction heavy nuts.
Oh, really? That's funny. What else can you eat? I mean, you can eat other things, but it's a good snack. So Aaron's sons, specifically Nadav and Avihu, they take their cisterns, their frying pans, and what do? Vaytnu v'hem eish. They place on it fire. Excuse me. And they place on it this incense, Vayikra v'livnei Hashem, and they offer it in front of God. Eish zara, a foreign fire. Asher lo tzivah usam, that was not commanded of them. In response, Vateitze eish milifnei Hashem, and fire again comes bursting out from God. Vatochal osam, and they are consumed. Vayimsu lifnei Hashem, and they perish in front of God. They perish there in Ohel Moed. Okay. And then there's this response, which, by the way, also needs to be analyzed, but I don't think we have time for that today. Although it is important, but not for now, because exactly what's going on is quite complicated. Ladies, my question that I ask you... Actually, you know what? I want to read a little bit more. Change my mind. Moshe speaks to Aaron and says, this is what God said, I will sanctify by those who are close to me, I will offer glory for the nation, and Aaron was silent. Vayikra Moshe el Mishael ve'el Tzafan b'nei Uziel do to Aaron, and Aaron's uncles are called in, and they are told to remove these Se'u es achechem, remove your brothers, remove your brethren from the Kodesh outside the camp. V'yikrevu v'yasim b'chu tono sam, and they are removed from their toques, and that's why Chazal say how were they killed. Their bodies, the fire went inside, right? Because I understand they got consumed. How could there still be clothing? Right? When there's fire, everything gets burnt up. So it must be just their physical bodies were consumed, but their clothes remained. There was what to remove, right? Despite there being a fire. They were removed. And again, there's a sense of mourning that then takes place, and these very powerful words. Famous words, infamous words. The entire Jewish community mourns this terrible, terrible tragedy. A day that was supposed to be days of joy and simcha have actually turned into days of tremendous anguish and tragedy. Okay. The next pasuk in pasuk ches really, Yain v'shechar al teisht. Aaron is talking about the prohibition of consuming alcohol, specifically wine and shechar, before entering Ohel Moed.
Interesting juxtaposition.
Yes, which leads to what? Those saying, they were drunk, and therefore specifically. So that, of course, begs the question, well, how are they supposed to know if they're only told later, right? Although one could argue that maybe they were told later. They were told earlier, but now the Torah is only recording it to show that they failed to listen and to what was already earlier told them. Or you can argue, no, they should have known. You don't drink. We know that drinking really is something which is quite negative in Chumash. We see that really people who are drunk often do things that are inappropriate. How could you? What kind in Hevel is not enough? I'm not kind in Hevel. Noach isn't good enough, right? We see what happens with Noach when he drinks. You don't see what happens with first of all, according to Midrash, it's a das might have been yayin as well. Other cases where wine plays a very significant role in Chumash. Anyone else know besides Noach?
Lavan.
Very good. Lavan.
No, he wasn't drunk when he had relations with his daughters.
Lot, you mean? Yes, I think he meant Lot. Right.
Yeah,
He meant Lot.
Yeah.
Yes. Lot. Very good. Exactly. That was the other case that I was thinking of. There you go. From negative perspective, wine is a positive perspective. That's Malki Tzedek, but from negative, that. So we see that definitely wine, at least has this potential. They don't need to be warned. It should have been known. You don't go intoxicated. But now, as being foremost. Other way you look at it, Chazal definitely needed to try and understand, as you mentioned, what's a juxtaposition. It seems to be totally out of character. Okay. So what did you do that was so bad? Question number 2. Is this the first time that we heard of all these different themes, or perhaps was there another time where we heard of something very similar to this?
I saw the other side of the source sheet, so.
Yeah, I actually was debating when I photocopied it today at chat, I should probably hand them out in separate sheets so that I don't, yes, I was worried actually when I handed it out. Okay, so let's go through this for a second. Because on the back of the source sheet points to,
We're allowed to look?
you can take a look, to Tzitzit, to Gan Eden. So flip back, and with that, I think we're gonna. Can you tell me at least 5 similarities between the Nadav and Avihu story and Tzitzit? Some are really easy, some are a little more creative.
They did something they weren't supposed to.
Okay, the fundamentally was they did something they weren't supposed to do. By Tzitzit, God commanded them, don't eat, and they ate. And here, specifically, the Torah said they offered an Eish Zarah Sher Lo Tzivau Sam. So it wasn't that, again, There was like a losa. They violated a losa. Say God said, don't do it, or they did something that they were told they were commanded to do. So very, very similar. Good. What else? What? No, I forgot to charge it. I think actual battery in my bag. I'm not gonna go get it.
I was thinking Cain and Hevel maybe. Like
how?
They both offered up korbanos.
Okay, they both offered up korbanos voluntarily. So I don't understand what's wrong with offering a korban. By the way, that's actually a good question. What's wrong with offering a korban you're not supposed to offer? It was okay for. And by the way, is that the problem? Was Cain's korban, which wasn't accepted, right? Was the problem was he did something he wasn't supposed to do?
Well, don't people say that it was because it wasn't his best?
But again, does that mean? But fundamentally, it's a good idea. He didn't execute it properly. So you're trying to say that the idea of bringing them in korban is a good idea? They shouldn't have brought fire. They should have brought, I don't know, sheep.
That's the way they did it. It was that they did it drunk.
So it was. See here? This is exactly what Chazal is trying to understand. No! What's wrong with initiative? What's wrong with bring additional korban? That's not the problem.
Were none of Avihu specifically told they were not allowed to, Adam and Chava?
Okay, very good. They weren't told not to. What's wrong with initiative? What's wrong with bringing extra korban? What's wrong with davening a little bit more? Why? So therefore, it says you're right. That's not the problem. The problem is not what they did, but how they did it. And that's the intoxication issue. No, what they did was fundamentally wonderful, encouraged. The problem was they did it intoxicated. The problem is it doesn't fit so well with one aspect. Which one? It says Asher lo tziva osam. So if they take a foreign fire they weren't commanded to do, what's the lo tziva osam?
They were commanded to do it drunk. They're commanded to maybe bring one, just the command was don't come in drunk.
No, but it doesn't appear that's what the pasuk says. But no? Unless you think otherwise. What do you think when it says in pasuk?
Either sounds very
bad. Right, I agree. They brought a foreign fire they shouldn't have done. That sounds very bad.
The actual couture itself or the actual whatever. I don't know, the thing itself sounds bad.
Right, well take a look. Where did that fire come from? Look at Pasuk of Dalet. Fire which came from God now. Meaning, it could be that in the day of the Miluim, you don't create your own human fire. The fire that's supposed to come is only God's fire, so to speak. That's the fire came down to the Mizbeach. It's almost as if they took that fire. But I think fundamentally there's something else that's going on here. Where else do we see parallels from this narrative to the Gan Eden story? Besides this thing we're supposed to do, what else is similar?
I always learned that they didn't consult people around them, they could have.
Okay, so that's what the Gemara says. They didn't consult the elders. They were paskin halacha lifnei Rabbi, which means they basically did something without asking permission. Which is again showing that what they did was maybe right, maybe wrong, but it questions a human initiative. It's right place, right time, or at least consult first. Again, they're playing with fire, right? So, I actually really fundamentally think they're all the same thing, as you'll see in a minute. But let's go back. Again, let's connect it to the Gan Eden story. Where do we see connections to this in the Gan Eden story? Let's start with an easy one. This is Yom HaShemini, the 8th day, after 7 days. Now, Chazal do say this happened on the 6th day, but from the Pshat and Chumash, it's after 7 days of creation. Then you have this next stages, Perek Gimel, which is the Chet, right? So to some extent, it's coming after these 7 days.
Yeah, it's very early on.
It's very early on, right? Okay, that's a bit of a stretch, but okay, it still fits a little. What else do we see happens? What else? We see that both are done after a bracha. There's a bracha by Vayivrech Elokim es Yom HaShavi v'kadesh oso, and here, according to Chazal, there's a bracha from Aaron, which was the Yivrech Hashem Yishmerecha bracha. Okay? What else do we see that's very similar? we say, and take a look in Perek Yud and Pasuk Aleph, Vayikra, and they took, Vayitnu, and they gave. Those, if you flip the page, ladies, you're going to see those same verbs by Gan Eden. Right? Vatiten. And they took. Vatira. And they see, right? We see there's idea of taking and giving also by Gan Eden, right? By Itzadas. What else do we see that's similar? So this concept of Vatochal also. They were consumed by fire. This idea of eaten, also obviously appears in both stories. And of course, what's the punishment for both of them? When you eat from Eitzadas Mos Tammuz. And what really happens, and they don't die, it's not like the poisonous Snow White apple, but what happens to them, they get banished and they're kicked out of the Gan. Well, what happens to their bodies? They are removed from the Ohamoed. They're also taken out. Right? They're also removed. They're banished from closest to God. They're banished from Ohamoed, just like Adam and Chava were banished from Gan Eden as a result of transgressing God.
Was them being taken out of Gan Eden? No.
Oh, of course it is.
Oh, they weren't killed.
They weren't killed.
But they wasn't there, of course, that
but that's what I mean.
Eventually they will die as opposed to...
So death was introduced.
Yeah.
Okay. So remember that they weren't able to go back to Eitz HaChaim because they would have been able to live forever. So that's where they couldn't go back to it. They couldn't eat from Eitz HaChaim. They're banished. So,
but you're saying most Musin can be understood
as banishment, as galus. Yeah, we see that in Chumash, right?
Where?
What happens to Jewish people if they don't follow God? They die. What's death? Galus. Galus and death are the exact same thing. The tantamount to almost the same.
It's not meant literally?
It could be, but it's also meant literally.
Cool.
Right? I mean, galus clear. For example, what happens if you kill someone on purpose? You get death. What happens if you go by accident? You get galus. It's almost the same thing. Right. What happens to the Jewish people if they don't follow the ways of the Torah? What's Hashem going to say? I'm going to destroy Yisrael. That's death. If you don't follow the mitzvahs, what does it say? If you follow it, it's all. If you follow the ways of Hashem, you live. Chaim. You get Chaim, right? If you don't follow the ways of Hashem, you get Maves. You get Ra. What's Maves and Ra? Galus.
That's so interesting. I don't think I ever heard that before.
Yeah. So throughout Chumash is the theme. Where does it start from? Gan Eden. How does it start from Gan Eden? Because you begin Gan Eden most Tammuz, and what happens? They get Galus. Yeah. Why? Because the greatest bracha, what's the definition of Chaim? Closest with God. The fact that your heart beats doesn't mean you have Chaim. The definition of life is closest to God. So what then is the greatest punishment? Not necessarily physical death, but also spiritual death, which is exile from... What?
It's like the punishment of the Nachash. That it no longer need communication.
Right, exactly. Right, that's exactly the same idea. Right. We see that it's clearly a theme, and that's why I'm going back to Eretz Yisrael is life, Israel's life, Torah is life. Why is Torah life? Why is Israel life? Because it's returning back to Israel, which is life, which is Gan Eden, which is connecting to God. As there's more mitzvahs in Eretz Yisrael, there's more mitzvahs in Gan Eden, that's life. Right? Okay. There's a lot. That's a good, it's a theme throughout Chumash. Okay, good. So let's go on. Now, what else do we see that's very similar? Look at this emphasis on clothing. And hay. Again, what happens to Gan Eden? Kosnos or Vayal. God gives them this kosnos or this clothing of skin after Gan Eden. And if you don't believe me, it's in Pasuk Chafalef on the back of the page. Right? Again, we see this clothing. Kosnos is not a very popular terminology in Chumash. It's mentioned in both places. So we see there's a lot of parallels between them. I think there's one more, I just can't remember it. That might be it. So again, what do we see from here? We see this concept of not listening to God. Doing something you weren't told to do. By the way, what was the purpose? Oh, of course, this is so important. This is the most important one, perhaps. Why did they eat? Why did they do it? Why did Nadav and Avihu do it? Because they wanted to be Rishayim? They did it because they wanted to be pagan? They wanted to cause trouble? They wanted to, they're pyromaniacs? Why did they do it? Vayikra v'lifnei Hashem. They want to come close to God. had the right intentions. I don't doubt that for a minute. They weren't being mean and they weren't being rebellious per se. They weren't being anti-God. Hey, let's get him. Let's ruin this day. Let's do something we're supposed to. No, they had the right intentions. When the Isha and the Adam eat from Eitz Hadas, are doing it for the wrong reasons or the right reasons? Well, look what the Chumash says. Very good. Right? They wanted to know Hashem. Because if they eat from it, what will happen? They want to become more godly. They want to become more like God. They want to become closer to God. So to some extent, what the Torah is, I think, saying is they're both very similar. Now, I actually think this story in Shemini is teaching us a lot about the Gan Eden story. What do I mean? Is that if you want to come closer to God, sometimes you have to distance yourself from God. It's not always what I want to do, what I feel like, which is, by the way, very difficult in the modern world. In the modern world, it is about what I want, what I feel like, and my own autonomy. I don't like being told no. No, it's a very difficult word, dangerous word. No one likes the word no. But the Chumash, I think, is saying sometimes being close to God is not doing what you want. It's taking a step back. It's you want to do that. You think it's a good idea, but actually you are mistaken. Eitz Hadas is saying don't do what you think will make you closer to God. You actually don't know better than God. Wait to do something till you're told by Moshe and Aaron. Check in with the rabbis. Check in with your leaders first before you make certain decisions. You might have the right intention. No one's saying you have the wrong intention. At the right place. When you're drunk, what happens? Again, you don't have control. You lose a sense of inhibition, right? You lose a sense of you just do. You act because you can't think because you lose that inhibition because you're intoxicated. By the way, you ever see these people? I'm spiritually drunk, right? Again, there's this notion of come close to God when a person's maybe drunk, but it doesn't mean it's permissible. It doesn't mean it's appropriate. It doesn't mean it's right. So I think in many ways, the Nadav and Avihu story and the Gan Eden story are really all one. They're all about inappropriate ways to get close to God because at the end of the day, it wasn't commanded. Now, it's true maybe in the first episode, it really wasn't commanded. Like, don't do this. And they did it, but they had the right intentions. But one can still argue, no, they had the right intentions. What's so bad? But fundamentally, they were literally playing with fire. And specifically, by the way, we see in the areas of creativity, the Mishkan is not the place for creativity necessarily. And just by the way, as an aside, which is true, one of the greatest challenges in the Jewish world today is how much room is there in creativity in the shul, which is like a mini Mishkan, right? How much creativity should there be? Can we add our own tefillos? Not right? Some tefillos have been added, and right? What about, women's role? All these things. It's interesting. The fire is often around in the shul, right? It has been, by the way. It's not a modern thing. Shul and the way shuls look. Sephardi shuls are Ashkenazi shuls, like Nazi shuls, they adopt a little bit more like the local, places, right? People were opposed to that, people were upset, It's interesting to see that shul, specifically the Mishkan, is often a place for these battlegrounds. And I think what Chumash is saying is that, it's not always about what I want, what I think is right. There has to be a sense of, take a step back. Sometimes being close to God is distancing from God. You want to become V'yisem Kelokim? That's not necessarily a good thing, V'yisem Kelokim. You need to be V'yisem Ka'anashim. And if you really become closer to God. And Nadav and Avihu, by offering this Korban, for Cain and Havel, they should have offered the Korban. Initiative. Thanksgiving. But for Nadav and Avihu, at this moment, when things were so regimented, right? Moshe Aaron, do this, do that, do this. That's not a time for you to perhaps show what you want to do. Or maybe, especially how they did it. They did it drunk. What does it mean when you're drunk? Again, you just do things. You don't think when you do things when you're drunk. You just do them. So I think this narrative here in Shemini is telling us a lot about a major theme throughout Chumash, especially if Gan Eden is like death, right? So you want to come close to God. If you don't want galus, it's actually about following the mitzvahs of Hashem. So following the call Hashem, the voice of God, the will of God is actually how we come closer to God and how we can avoid death, how we can avoid galus, and actually become closer to the Ribono Shel Olam. And I think that really is fundamentally one of the major lessons of this week's Parsha, and connecting it also to Gan Eden, which is pretty neat as well. Okay, thank you everyone.